Hello, listeners. Kathy Lawless, Life Story Curator, bringing you the podcast series, How Did I Get Here? A series of interviews designed for people just starting out in their careers, people in transition, or possibly feeling stuck, and giving them access to stories of people who have been there, done that, so that they might be inspired with some new ideas, or maybe just comforted knowing they are not alone, that everybody starts somewhere and everyone goes through times of transition and times when they feel stuck. Today, I'm very excited to be interviewing Jennifer Henneman. She is the Associate Curator in the Petrie Institute of Western American Art at the Denver Art Museum. Hello, Jennifer.
Hi, thanks, Kathy. I'm so glad to be here with you.
Me too. I'm excited to have a curator, a fellow curator. I guess you're in a whole different league. I got to say that. But this is a very interesting career that I think our listeners will really get some enjoyment out of. So I can't wait to get into your story. But listeners, as you know, I always like to start with the icebreaker questions so that we can get to know Jennifer and how she grew up. So Jennifer, if you would share where you grew up, how many siblings you had, and where you were in the birth order, and how you think that shaped you as a person.
Yeah, sure, Kathy. I grew up in a very small town in north central Montana where my parents farmed and ranched, and they do still live on the farm and ranch in Montana. I am the eldest of three. My sister is 1 year younger than me, and so very close in age, and also we have a very, very close relationship. And then my brother is 8 years younger than me. So I think in many ways he had more of an experience of being an only child, for better or worse, for much of his growing up. But we're all still very close. And although even though I live out of state, we still see each other fairly regularly. And again, I grew up in a small community. Just to give you a sense, my graduating class was 18 students. But at the time, my public school had a really great roster of teachers. And so I feel that between my teachers and my family, the first 18 years of my life were really very supported, very full of love, and set me, I think, provided a great foundation for getting to where I am now, which is curator at the Denver Art Museum.
Yeah. Wow. 18 in a class. That's that's pretty small. I went to Elizabeth, Colorado is where I grew up, and our class, I think my class had about 70 kids in it, which was pretty small.
So
And then
small, yep.
yeah, and then I moved to Castle Rock and went to the Douglas County High School there, and there was 500 in my class. So yeah, so it was very
Wow.
interesting to go from that
Oh,
the small pond to the bigger pond. But you were in an even smaller pond. But
I was in a very small pond, yes. But I did get lucky. I had some very good friends growing up, and one of them, my best friend, in fact, she moved to Denver over a decade ago and is still here. So when I moved to Denver 4 years ago, I was lucky enough to have family essentially on site.
oh yeah, yeah, that's always nice to have someone and it happens
Yeah.
to be your best friend. Hello.
Yeah, exactly.
So, what did you do as a youngster? Were you involved in sports, or did you work with animals, music? What were your activities?
Yeah, my sister and I are so close in age that our lives really, much of our lives have been shared together. And we were both very actively involved in our schools, thanks to mom, who I think really tried hard to make sure that we were kept busy and occupied. My sister did dance, I did piano. And then because it was a small school, you basically did all the sports and all the clubs. It didn't matter if you were terrible at something. You just did it because they needed a butt on the bench or a name on the team.
Yep, they needed people.
You just needed people, right? So growing up, we did many extracurricular activities, which included dance and music, but also my sister and I were both very active in 4-H, where we raised livestock. I was more interested in sewing and crafting, and then once I hit high school, then the sports really took over. In small towns, sports play such a central role in the way the community socializes and the extent to which you travel. And so I did basketball, volleyball, track. I tried cross country and golf and discovered that neither one of those suits my personality or skill set very well. But no, we were kept very busy for a small town. I think we had a lot of opportunity, and yeah, we just kind of did all the things.
Yeah, well, and because you had the opportunity to, and they needed you to.
Yeah.
The rest of the team couldn't play if there wasn't enough players, right?
No, no, yeah, you had to be on it. And again, my teachers who were really quite excellent were also good at getting us involved in clubs like Science Olympiad. The first times I ever traveled significantly were for national Science Olympiad competitions, which is kind of funny because I'm not a scientist, but uh, regardless, these activities included provided a lot of opportunities to get to travel beyond again what was a very small community, a very close and loving community, but nonetheless helped me understand that the world was a much bigger place. And you have to understand, I grew up. My generation is the one that started without the internet, and then throughout the course of junior high and high school started to use the internet. So in terms of thinking about the size of the world, these early experiences with clubs and sports and traveling were really quite important. I think looking back, certainly quite important to where I ended up.
Wow, yeah, that would be interesting that that's your experiences. It started without it and then end up with it, and it's just now a new tool. Whereas
Right,
now this next generation, they all started with it at a very young age. So
right,
yeah, I was definitely in the generation before that I didn't get it until after I was out of college.
right.
Um, so yeah, it wasn't part of my high school or junior high experience. Very cool. Well, what a great experience! It sounds like you, like you said, some great teachers, and just you
Yep.
had so many opportunities. They just wanted to just throw a lot of opportunities at young people. It sounds like, and see what stuck. And how cool is
Yep.
that?
I really value that I had a diversity of experience. But I often wonder if I had grown up in a larger school where it seems like one has the chance to self-identify with specific activities or specific groups, how that would have changed, the way I see myself in my life. But I'm really very grateful for the opportunity to dabble in a little bit of everything from this very remote location.
Yeah. Wow.
Hmm.
Very cool. Well, we're going to shift gears just a little bit now. And on the fun meter scale of 1 to 5, 1 being couch potato, 5 being life of the party, where do you put yourself?
Yeah, I'm definitely a 3. I love having a good time, but I'm not a party animal. I mean, my a good time to me is like cycling 100 miles or climbing a mountain or reading a book for hours on end. So my idea of fun isn't necessarily the number 5 on the fun meter, but so yeah, I think 3, squarely a 3.
Cool. So the number doesn't really equate to being around other people necessarily, but it's about the enjoyment you get out of whatever activity you're doing.
Well, I guess it depends on how you're defining fun in this case.
Yeah. Yeah. Good point. Very cool. Okay. And so then on the risk taking meter, same scale, 1 to 5, where do you put
Yep,
yourself?
I'm a 3. I'm right in the middle. I enjoy a calculated risk from time to time, but I am not an adrenaline junkie or reckless. I am pretty measured in terms of how I approach my life. So I
Oh,
think a 3.
okay. Well, I just love those two questions because it's interesting as we go through your journey and your story, how they play out or how they start to come up again, and we just see different patterns in that. It kind of sets the stage in a way. I think for some
Yeah,
of our listeners to understand again what kind of makes you tick and why you made the decisions that you made. So,
sure. Well, I wouldn't say that I've always been. If you had asked me 10 or 15 years ago, my number on the scale would be very different. It's just that now I am in a stable job and in a stable lifestyle, and so my risk taking and fun taking choices reflect that. Whereas 15, 20 years, 10, 15 years ago, I think those numbers would be very different.
oh, well, where would they be then?
It would depend on which part of my life I was
Oh,
in.
okay, cool. So it really depends on part of your life, where you're at. I get it.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, tell us a little bit about what it means to be an associate curator in the Petrie Institute of Western American Art at the Denver Art Museum. What is that like? Most people don't. I know I don't understand what a curator does and what it looks like.
Yeah, I think that's very true, and I think it's a great question. Though the word curator in the original Latin means to take care of, to be a caretaker of something or for someone. And that fundamental definition is still very much the root of my job as a curator. I am responsible for ensuring that every artwork in the collection for which I work and for which I am responsible is safe, is stored well, is kept in good condition. The Of course, the museum is composed of a great number of different people, teams who behind the scenes help with all of those, and in fact are more expertly trained in many of those things. For example, while I am responsible for making sure that the objects in my care are in good condition, I am not a conservator. A conservator is the person with the scientific and art historical training to actually work on artworks that may have aged badly, or everything ages, so everything needs care at one point in time. And that, I don't do any of the hands-on caretaking. I am just responsible for being aware of the state of the artworks in my collection. So
Oh,
caretaking is really the fundamental job of the artworks that are entrusted to me. But beyond that, I am also, of course, a researcher. I am responsible, I hold the knowledge for the artworks in my collection. I know who made them, why they made them, who saw them when they were made, if the works were exhibited, if they traveled, how they were received. And then over time, I'm also responsible for understanding how the artworks have changed meaning, or how they have been interpreted differently, or how they may mean very differently today than they would have 150 years ago, let's say. So I'm a caretaker of the objects. I am a caretaker of the knowledge around those objects. And by an extension, I am a storyteller. I have the great responsibility and privilege of choosing the stories that are told in our gallery spaces about any given work of art. So we have a permanent collection for which I am daily responsible, but we also, of course, organize traveling or temporary exhibitions. And so my storytelling capabilities and responsibilities extend to organizing temporary exhibitions, such as an exhibit we currently have up right now that's about the work of Winslow Homer and Frederick Remington, two artists who were active during the late 19th and early 20th century in the United States. So I am a storyteller to a variety of different levels. And then I think finally, a major component of my job is I am a public speaker. I, as a curator, am the public face of the collection for which I am responsible for my department, which is the Petrie Institute of Western American Art, and certainly a spokesperson for the temporary exhibitions that I help to organize. And the Petrie Institute is responsible for the scholarship and programming stemming from and related to the collection of Western American art at the Denver Art Museum, which is a global or encyclopedic collection. And we define Western American art a little bit loosely in that it's a collection of artwork that was produced of and about the American West, its people, its landscapes, its wildlife, by artists who may or may not have lived here permanently. They may have just passed through and produced a few things about the West. For example, a great American modernist, Marsden Hartley, came west very, very briefly, and he then returned to Germany, which is where he was living at the time, and produced quite a long series of paintings about the American Southwest. And we have one of those paintings in our collection. So it was not painted in the West, it was not painted by somebody who was from the West, but it is absolutely a painting about the American West. And I hope that gives you a starting idea of how I spend my time and what I do.
wow. Fascinating. I know it's an ideal way for you to describe that because I think it gives us such a great broad perspective of all the pieces or all that you do with your job. Well, we're going to come back to what you're doing now, but
Okay.
Right now, I'm going to shift a little bit of a gear and go to how did I get here? Uh, did you always want to be an associate curator when you grew up? I mean, is that something when you were a young girl and back in Montana that you were drawn to Western American art?
No, no, no. We didn't grow up. We didn't grow up in a place where art jobs were really a thing. I do have fond early memories of going to a town named Great Falls, Montana, that had a museum. It's the Charles Russell Museum. It's still there, and I have very fond memories of visiting on a field trip. But I looking back, I can't tell you that that's the moment when I thought this is what I'm going to do. Art curator, in part because it's the understanding the responsibilities of the job it's an opaque job. It's not clear what a curator does, and so I had very little understanding of the curatorial position of museums even and how museums work. No, I would say no. I had no idea and no expectation that I would become something I knew nothing about at the time. I've
Uh-huh.
never had a clear vision, unlike some of my friends who have had very clear visions about what they wanted to do, and I've always been a little envious of that kind of clarity. I I nope. I've never had an idea, Kathleen. I've never I've always been good at school, and so I stayed in school for a long time. But um,
Yeah,
but
to get
having so I did, however, I come from a line of very creative individuals, resourceful, creative, scrappy craft people, and when I started college, I did study studio art. I had a double major in studio art and French. And so I guess I've always been inclined or predisposed towards the arts, even if I grew up in a place where I had, I would say, very little to no understanding of what an arts job actually looked like beyond
Mhm.
maybe a high school art teacher, which I'm very grateful for my high school educators. Um, so when I went to college, I studied studio art and realized that it's such a wonderful thing to work with one's mind and hands in a creative endeavor, but I didn't really have a lot to say with my art. And I think today especially it's really important that you be driven and passionate and have a vision for what you want your artwork to say or do. I just really enjoyed making art, and that's not enough really to keep a person motivated in the studio. But studying in France I studied abroad for a year as a junior in college, and that was pretty eye-opening because I'd never lived in a place where centuries of history was so visually apparent in every waking moment of my life. And being in France was the first time I began to understand that studying artworks, that artworks could become gateways into understanding history in a really complex and interesting way. So so the inkling of the ways that art can be useful in understanding our world those seeds were planted when I studied abroad in France during my undergraduate career. And after my 4 years of college, I realized that studio art was something you have to be so dedicated to doing, and I just wasn't that wasn't going to be me. So I did transition into an art history master's degree right after college, and I went to London to study there. And so, and then after it was a 1 year degree, so it was pretty intense. And I thought at that point, I'm done. I'm so done with school,
Ah,
Kathy. I was so burnt out. And I took time off to work, and I worked around the world. I had really interesting short-term jobs in Asia, in Europe, and across the U.S. And so the entire time I felt very lost. I remember having regular existential crises about what the heck I was supposed to be doing with my life. And while it felt very unstable, but looking back now, I see that the the great benefit and privilege of having the opportunity to travel and just garner and gather a range of experiences has become a very fundamental part of my trajectory into this career, and also I think a useful useful experience for understanding that there are a diversity of ways to live and to look and to understand and interpret. And so while I find myself now in a field where I'm expected to be an expert, I also am very aware of the limitations of my knowledge and the fact that I can't know everything, and that group work and diversity and multiplicity of perspectives is a much richer way of thinking about art and human creativity. And while I can articulate that now to you, I wouldn't have been able to have said that 15 years ago when I was traveling and feeling really lost about my life. But regardless, I just kind of powered on through. Not knowing what to do, I just kept saying yes to opportunities, and ultimately I ended up in a job in London that was in the private sector. It was a well-paying job, but I had a moment where I woke up one day thinking, is this what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life? And it was a very depressing thought. And so I decided, you know what, I can keep doing this job and making some money, or I can try to go back. I can try for school one more time, do the PhD, do the final graduate degree. And I thought, you know what, both of these options would be great. So I, at that point, decided just to apply to one PhD program in a place where I really wanted to live, which was Seattle, Washington. And I thought, if I get in, great. I'm going to live in a place I want to see. I'm going to do a program that looks really interesting. And if I don't get in, fine. I'll keep working this job that's enabling me to travel throughout Europe. I mean, that doesn't suck. So in the end of the story is that I got into this PhD program. And so I spent the next 5.5 years undertaking the coursework and the dissertation for my PhD, and finished that in 2016, and then was really fortunate to, the job market was not great, but I was fortunate enough to have networked extensively and was made aware of a position that was available in Denver, and here I am. So as a relatively clueless person going through the world, I somehow managed to find my way into this really extraordinary job, for which I am very grateful.
Wow, that was great. The path there, and it sounds like you kind of entered college initially picking subjects that interested you or areas of interest, art
Mm,
and French,
mhm. Mhm.
then kind of, well, where is this going to lead me? And then from there,
Yeah.
you just started to follow where that led you. That's it. I guess I'm really amazed about a leap from. Um, well, where did you do your undergrad? Did you say?
Yeah, at Montana State University in Bozeman, which is in southern Montana.
Okay, so you grew up there
Mhm.
in a small town, then
Yep.
you go to college in Montana, but then you end up in
Yep.
France,
Yes.
and then you're
And
traveling
then
the world.
London. Yeah. 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 From there, that I realized how big the world was, and I have to. There is a kind of myth of growing up in a small town where you just can't wait to break out. And I was excited to move on to the next step, but I wasn't. I remember thinking the night I graduated from high school, like, I have absolutely no idea what happens next. Like, I have no idea what the world holds for me, and I've gone through life having a pretty present sense of just how much I don't know, and I think that that naivete has translated into a curiosity that, from some perspectives, might look like risk taking, and from other perspectives might look like ignorance. And
Mhm.
I have been very motivated by what I enjoy doing, and by the stories and the objects that really grip my attention. And I recognize that that is not necessarily the most productive way to carve out a career path. Um, but it has somehow blessedly worked for me, and it will take me many more years and much more retrospection and introspection to kind of understand how it all came about.
Well, yeah, because it sounds like there was quite a bit of uncertainty in this journey. And yet you were, at the time, it sounds like you were feeling lost and maybe uncomfortable, but not sure where it was headed, but you were still willing to kind of just stick it out and figure out where it was going. When you look
Yeah,
back, now you know
yeah.
where that it was super valuable, but at the time it probably
Yeah.
didn't feel as good as it maybe looks now.
No, certainly not. And certainly even today I often think, well, why didn't I do something practical like become a medical doctor, especially in a time of a pandemic, but we need medical doctors. And part of me thinks, well, maybe, maybe it's too bad I didn't try for a more practical field. And part of me also recognizes, one, the fundamental necessity of human creativity, and I don't think that art is a luxury. I think that art is a necessity, and so I don't see my job as a fluffy extra. Just so I want to make clear, I'm not making a dichotomy between medical doctors and art historians. I think both are really, really important. But my track into I could have chosen to take a more practical path and say I'm going to be a doctor because I'm good at school and I can do the work. But instead, I chose the more the art creativity oriented stories, a little more amorphous, even focus on art objects. And I think that has been reflected in my rather amorphous, non-linear trajectory into this position.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to a, 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 a friend who is in the transition space, and she does coaching for executives in when they're leaving their organization, um, and uh, and then also for corporations that hire her company to do transition counseling and things of that nature, or coaching. And she
Mm-hmm.
mentioned that people kind of pick three different careers for three different reasons. There's the
Hmm.
vocation, which is kind of the medical field, and then
Hmm.
there's the opportunistic, which is how do I just keep following what I like, and
Yeah.
ideas and opportunities present themselves. And then there's the one that's like, well, I'm good at math, so I'm going to go into accounting and finance, and then I go down that
Yeah.
path.
Right.
And
Interesting. Huh.
what she found was that the more successful in the business space, anyway, because that's the space she's been in, tends to be that opportunistic. Let me follow where I'm going, and find what's working well and where my strengths tend to lie, which I don't even know yet, right? Because I'm just
Huh.
still
Yeah.
exploring and experimenting. So that medical field is definitely that vocation. So just like you
Yeah.
said, you didn't have the passion for art,
Mm-hmm.
and what you wanted to
Mm-hmm.
say as the creator of art, but your passion for art is in the appreciation and the
Yeah.
collecting,
Mm-hmm.
what does it mean, the
Yeah.
knowledge of it.
Yeah. Well, good. Maybe this is all meant to be then.
Well, it sounds like, I think so, because I think it seems like you're where you should be.
I certainly have found my way into a career that really suits me so well. I had a number of work positions in a variety of different museums before, which has been really useful. I worked in different kinds of departments within museums, and I think that has given me a better understanding of how museums work, because they're very complicated. They have very complicated internal workings, and they're fundamentally based on teamwork and group work. And so I, all that to say, I had worked in museums and I hadn't been drawn to them, to be honest. I had thought, oh, you know what? No, I'm going to stay away from museums. They're too complicated. I'm going to go into teaching. And I thought I wanted to be a university professor, which I still think would be a pretty great way to spend a life. But when I had the opportunity to work in a museum in a curatorial capacity, which I had never experienced before, it turns out that the job requirements suit me so well, and I thank goodness that somebody, in fact, in the story of my life, other people have often been better advocates for me than I have certainly been for myself, and they have seen me more clearly in some ways than I think I saw myself. And there have been a number of times along the way when a friend or a mentor has said, you really should consider fill in the blank, and it just had never occurred to me, and they were completely right. And this job happens to kind of have fallen along those lines when a friend basically told me, you know what, you need to try this out. And she was right. It fit me perfectly. So thank goodness for friends and mentors and an opportunity.
Yeah, yeah, it is very frequent, I think, that we find we don't know our gifts and our competencies because they're just who we are. And then someone
Right.
else points it out and you're like, well, oh, I didn't really know that. Other people don't think that way, or other people can't do that.
Right.
Um,
Right. Yeah.
yeah. It's funny.
Uh,
That reminded me of an interview I did, just published a couple episodes ago with Fallon Velez, where she was, as a young person, she was a gamer and just really into technology and electronics. And even as a young person, she was taking apart the remote to fix it when needed. If something happened with her games, she could fix it. But she never thought of technology as a career for herself until
oh,
later in
wow.
life, when someone said something about, well, you're really good at this technology. Why don't you do something with that? I mean, so I was surprised to
Yeah.
hear she didn't see it. And
Yep.
it wasn't until I interviewed her that she revealed that part, because I just assumed that was her
Yeah.
story. But she tried a bunch of different
Yeah.
things. So
Yeah. No, that's fascinating. You just really hope that the people around you are, and I've been lucky in this way that, people who love and care for me and do see me pretty honestly, sometimes brutally, but you need those people, because you're right. We all have blinders and blind spots. And thank goodness for those around us who love us and see us in all of our complexity.
yeah. Well, and you, though, as the receiver, though, of their suggestion, also needs to be open-minded. Was there any resistance?
No, I really needed a job. No, and I mean, I say that facetiously, but no, I think one thing I am pretty, I don't know if proud is the right word, but I recognize in myself that I'm willing to look at a possibility and consider it, at least consider it before say. I'm not a no right away person. I tend to be a
Ah,
let me think about that person, and often it becomes a yes, because at least in my past lives, I've only benefited from saying yes to opportunities, and that does not mean that every opportunity has been pleasant or productive or psychologically helpful, but there, all these experiences have helped me understand different parts of who I am and indeed what I want to do, even if that vision has always been fairly murky.
yeah. Well, I think life in general, there isn't a straight path.
Right.
Even though I think on the outside, sometimes it looks like there's a straight path. And when we look backwards, it
Hmm.
seems like there's a straight path, which is one of the reasons I like to do this podcast, is that
Yeah.
when you don't know someone and you look at them from the outside, you make a lot of these, you know, judgments or assessments about how they
Oh,
got
sure.
there, and they don't, and you
Sure.
think, oh, they have it all figured out when I don't. And so that's what I
Yeah.
like sharing with listeners, is that the
Yeah.
complexity and the decision making and the exploration and discovery that happens along the way. And by the way, you're just summarizing a little snippet of it, right? I'm sure.
Yeah.
I am
But
curious. Go
yeah.
ahead.
But I just was gonna, what you do, the kind of service that you offer, and the way you help people tell stories. I mean, that's a real skill, because that is the looking back and tying a life into a line or some kind of a story. I mean, that's the trajectory. And even if it's not linear, it's a really, I think, it's a special thing to be able to help people see how their path has, how different points have connected. But that is a task we really can only do in retrospect. It's always, for me at least, it's always felt messy in the present.
Yeah. Yeah. Same here. It does. It feels. I keep trying to, I think, because that's what my brain does. Is I like to arrange things and
Yeah.
take complex things and make them simpler. And so I keep looking at all these stories and go, well, what's the pattern? What's the theme? What's
Yeah.
the overlap? And I'm like, wow, um, well, I'm not seeing very many that I can really. That's what I loved about that friend who said, well, she saw three things, which was, the
Yeah.
vocation, the opportunistic, and then well, I just followed where, and I'm like, oh, I haven't really. So now I'm paying more attention to those three
Yeah.
patterns.
That's
Um,
really a useful way to look at life. That's very helpful.
yeah. And recognizing, I think I fell into the opportunistic because I didn't know what I wanted to be. Um,
Mhm.
but I am
Mhm.
curious. So, How did you talked about a PhD program, and that's
Mhm.
a huge undertaking.
Yes.
I would have thought that you already knew you wanted to be a curator to do something like a PhD. What were you Tell us a little bit more about the program you did and what you were thinking the outcome was gonna be.
Well, I think it helps to have a sense of what you want to do when you do something like a PhD program. And I originally thought I wanted to be a professor, so I thought, well, I will go into teaching,
Ah,
and
okay.
and that's why I went back to my PhD. And and I again, that is still a career path I would be open to, but the job market was not great when I graduated, and beyond that, while art historians as professors and art historians as curators do many of the same things in terms of research, writing, synthesis of ideas, interpretation, what's a little bit different is our audiences vary a little bit. Instead of being in a classroom, my audience ranges from elementary school on up to advanced degree on up to the elderly. So my audience is public, and the the time I am able to spend with objects, I spend so much time with the art objects. These are actual things that take up space in the storage of the museum, for which I'm responsible, and so that is actually a pretty significant shift, or difference between museum work versus academic work, where you may not always have access to objects, or have responsibility for objects in the same way, and there's no value judgment, either way. They're just slightly different careers, and it turns out that I really love having time, spending time with objects and being responsible for how they're displayed, how they're interpreted. But one thing I really wasn't prepared for, again, I thought I was going to teach, and so much of my work was academic writing and presentations based on digital images. One thing I wasn't prepared for was, as a museum curator, I have to be able to think in three-dimensional space, and I need to have a pretty good sense of design, whether it's lighting design, color choice, so interior design, essentially. I need to have a good understanding of how any given artwork is going to look on a specific wall within a specific building, that then is layered with a specific kind of lighting, whether it's LED or other kind of lighting. So the intricacies of the design and three-dimensional space portion of being a museum curator is something I really wasn't aware of. And once I started this job and started to explore the ramifications of those decisions, it is such a fun part of the job, because it is very creative, and you do have to have a strong personal sense and develop what we call a developed eye, which is your own ability to assess what looks good, whether it's an artwork or where the artwork is placed on the wall. And those are the kinds of skills that really can only be built after years of experience on the job, which is not something that a PhD can teach you. And so I have found the museum career to be such a rewarding place, because there's still so much to learn. And I wouldn't I prior to my PhD, I could not have articulated to you what a curator really did, not having had experience in that field or thought about it critically. But I did know what a university professor does, and I still am drawn to that, the wonderful opportunity of exchanging ideas in a classroom with students who see the world differently than you. I think that's such an incredible thing to do. But I am so pleased that I I certainly, if I would say to anybody who wants to do a graduate degree, it's a really good idea to have at least some kind of an end goal. Otherwise, you may not get through it. But at the same time, if your end goal changes over the course of your career, that is totally okay, because the skills that one develops through a graduate degree in the humanities, and I'm speaking about the ability to read and understand and synthesize information, summarize it, and then express it either verbally or in text. Those are really important skill sets for a variety of different fields. So
Oh, yeah.
it's okay to pivot your skills, even if that one subject of expertise, which in my case would be art history, even if that changes, I just, one thing that the university model didn't do well for me was to help me see where my skills could be applied beyond this very, very narrow range of expertise. And I think that's a great disservice to many students who undertake advanced training, because the training you do, yes, you're working into a field of expertise, and hopefully that field works out for you. But the fact is, you're garnering such and honing such an amazing skill set that can absolutely be applied elsewhere. It's absolutely okay to pivot. And I didn't pivot very far. Certainly, I just kind of took the same track and took a slightly different path, to the left instead of the right. But it worked, and I think that kind of flexibility, that can feel really risky. I mean, this idea of risk is interesting because it felt risky, but it was actually fairly conservative. It was a conservative change given where I had come from and where I was going.
Well, and it's funny, as an outsider looking in, it looks like, well, it was very logical. Of course, that fits together.
Yeah, of course it works. Right.
Well,
I know.
I think you mentioned that as a curator too, you do have the opportunity maybe to do some speaking at colleges, or would it be an adjunct professor, or what would that look like? I mean, do you get to do
Yeah.
both now?
Well, I have the opportunity. The Denver Art Museum and the University of Denver have a very long relationship. I'm not clear about the details, but I know that in the past, curators have often taught at DU. And this fall, I have the opportunity. I will be co-teaching a course with the head of my department, who is also a curator. We will be co-teaching a course on Western American art for advanced undergraduates and master's degree students, which is really exciting because, now I get to wear both of those hats, and that I'm fully cognizant of the fact that that's going to be quite a workload. I mean, both of these jobs are very intense, but it is what I remain very passionate about the teaching component of my job. I do see myself as an educator in the museum, and while I'm not educating directly every day, all of my work goes towards helping our audiences understand more about art and also about the time in which specific artworks were produced. So art and history. And now I get to more directly channel that love into a classroom course. But the classroom course, this isn't a regular thing. This is the first time I will be teaching, and I don't know how that will look in the future, but it really is a beautiful relationship. I mean, at the end of the quarter, I might have a different story to tell when I'm burnt out, but I think it's going to be really fun. I'm actually very excited about it.
Well, and always the first time is, you're creating everything for the first time. The next time you do this, you would, this worked, Yep. This didn't, how can I change that? And you get leverage. So the workload's got to be higher the first time out.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. But I do know so much more about this field now, 4 years in, than I did before. And so there will be in some ways it will be not easier, but more efficient. And in many others, it will be difficult. I mean, teaching in a time of a pandemic is an added layer of interest, shall we say. So, this learning to be a little flexible and just go with, kind of take the punches as they come. And thankfully, I get to focus on subjects and focus on subjects I'm really into, and work with people I really appreciate and enjoy. So I've landed in a wonderful position in all of those ways.
Yeah. It sounds like it just, but I also appreciate you sharing the feeling of being lost, not sure what you were doing, how messy it felt at the time, and yet you kind of worked your way through it. Talk a little bit about when you were stuck. I guess you already shared that one time when you were, deciding to do your PhD, and you thought, well, I'll apply to two things if one of them works. I mean, that's kind of an interesting approach in itself, which is, I'm open to this and I'm open to moving. Have there been other times when you were stuck, and how did you decide how to get unstuck?
Well, I don't know if stuck is the right word so much as just unclear about what to do next. Um,
Like
I'd have,
unsettled? You felt scratchy and just uneasy?
well, it's not that, the thing is, I've never been out of work. I mean, I've always worked. I've always had a job. It's been very important to me to support myself and to make that working has been my way of engaging with the world. And I've worked such a wide variety of jobs, from barista and service jobs and retail, all the way up to different kinds of museum internships and like work on museum collections. So it's not so much. I've never felt. I'm not a kind of person who copes well with not doing, with not working, with not. So I've always kept myself busy. And I think there probably have been times in my life when stopping and pausing and assessing would have been a very intelligent thing to do. But instead, I've always just charged forward with this job or that job, and I guess I've never. I'd have to think about. I'd have to think about if there has been a time, and certainly my life has been very tinged with school. I've been in school so much, and so while I have been in the structure, shall we say, of a PhD program, there have been times when I didn't know how I was going to pay for my summer of research, and so there have been times when I've felt very unsure about how I was going to get the funding to accomplish the goals I needed to accomplish in order to finish the degree. One way or another, I always, plugged something in, found a place to work. One summer, I actually lived out of my car and I drove around the American West and I car camped. And I spent a little bit of that time in Cody, Wyoming, doing a research fellowship there. I mean, to me, that wasn't torture. To me, that was adventure. That was like, let's go see the West. So I don't know if it's, again, I don't know if it's just naivete or ignorance, but just being willing to move something, to go somewhere, do something. And I do recognize that part of that has been desperation and probably unhealthy. But at the same time, it has continued to propel me. This sense of I need to go somewhere, I need to do something, has moved me forward. And now truly, I find myself in the most stable spot of my life. And I have to say, it's very comfortable, and I want to embrace that, but I also want to be very wary of getting too comfortable.
Ah, yeah. Well, it's funny. I'm thinking now back to your 3 rating on your risk. Totally a 3
Hmm.
versus getting out of your car. Yeah, as a 5. I can totally see that, but it sounds like there's still an adventure part of you. It really just depends on, like you said, though, it's going to be calculated, more calculated now than maybe it was back then.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely more calculated now. I think there was maybe a little more desperation in some of my choices in the past, but I that can be very motivating. So, and it motivated me, certainly.
Yeah, yeah, that earning a living. How am I going to make rent or make whatever payments and obligations I have? Yeah,
Yeah,
it's very
exactly.
motivating.
Yep.
Well, Jennifer, I think I could talk to you all afternoon. I got so many questions about still your curator, but we do probably have to wrap up because I do like to keep these interviews to manageable sizes.
Manageable. I
Um,
appreciate that. I understand.
what about, do you see any patterns or themes that maybe stand out for your career or your journey?
Well, certainly for me, I really have been drawn to the human stories that can be told through artworks. And so, a common theme for me has been a, a personal interest in making and creating, and translated into an interest in why other people make and create. And so that certainly, that creativity part has been a common theme. It seems, now that I look back and reflect a little bit.
It also seems like there's a natural curiosity for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think curiosity broadly is is hugely important, and Yeah, Kathy, certainly. I think that's really critical. I couldn't be a researcher without being able to or wanting to ask questions, and I think my family and my parents would back that up, that I've been a question asker for my entire life.
You were that kid that just kept
I
saying
was
why.
that kid. It's so irritating. Yeah, that kid.
And how does this work? And why does this? And what
Yep.
does this do?
Yeah. No, that's true. And I've come to embrace that about myself. I think it's worth asking the questions.
Uh,
Uh,
well, any other lessons learned or words of wisdom maybe that you would share as we wrap up?
It's tricky because I feel like I feel like I'm at the very beginning of my career, even though it's taken me a long time to get here. I haven't in this particular field. I still have some time, I think, before I can look back and hand out any nuggets of wisdom. But it is really exciting, and I really appreciate the opportunity to spend time with you, thinking back on my trajectory here. And I hope that in the future I actually have confidence that I will develop experience. And if we revisit this in 10 or 20 years, I will have so many nuggets of wisdom to share. But at the moment I'm still collecting them myself.
Ah, okay. Well, I get that. Well, Jennifer, thank you so much for sharing your story and giving us a glimpse and insight into what it means to be an art curator. I mean, that was pretty exciting to learn about how you're such a caretaker of the objects, but a caretaker of the knowledge and a storyteller and a speaker. I mean, there's so many aspects of it that you really just
Yeah,
expanded my mind. And as a fellow
great.
curator or self-appointed without
Yeah,
PhD
yeah,
I mean, I'm very curious about all this. I'm like, oh, well, I maybe I need to expand my definition here a little bit or my
sure,
words. So,
absolutely.
and I also want to thank you, listeners. Jennifer took us on a tour of her exhibit that's currently at the Denver Art Museum, and it was fantastic. But it was also so fantastic to have her giving us that personal tour and sharing, the background of how the whole event came together, the cooperation between other partnerships with other museums. I mean, it was really fascinating. So I would highly encourage you to go down there. You can. This is the time, Jennifer. You can put a little plug in for your exhibit because I want to
Okay.
publish your
Yeah.
your interview here in the next couple weeks so people can get down there and see it. So yeah, tell us a little bit about the exhibit. You did earlier, but I think this is a great time to expand on that.
Great. No, I'm happy to. We have just reopened the museum, and one of the exhibits on display is an exhibit called Natural Forces, Winslow Homer and Frederick Remington. And this is an exhibit that I co-curated with 3 other curators, so a team of 4, which is a pretty big team. But we had such a good time working with these 2 artists of the late 19th and early 20th century who were really considered and still considered among the most important American artists of our country's history. And so the exhibit is up on display until September 7th. And Kathy, I had so much fun in the exhibit with you the other day. It really is so much more meaningful to be in the exhibit with people who are fresh to it, because I've been in it for gosh, we started working on this 3.5 years ago. So it was a real treat for me to share that with you. And I hope that if any of your listeners have the chance to go see it, they'll let me know what they think and just enjoy the extraordinary artworks on display.
It was a fascinating experience, and the exhibit it's beautiful, it's powerful, it's impactful, and I was so sad to hear that it opened actually in March. You said after your 3 years of curating, but the same day that the museum closed, right? Because of the
It
pandemic.
absolutely did. It was, yep, the day where they sent everybody home was the day it was supposed to open. I had my gala dress and everything for the big private opening, but that's okay. Our lenders worked with us and we extended the show, so we are able to have it here. It should have already been in Portland, Maine by now. That's one of our partners, but instead we waited until we could reopen, and now we are essentially showing the exhibit a little bit later for everybody's schedule. And that's just because of the generosity of our partners and our lenders, and we're so grateful to be able to have it on display here in Denver. We have such an extraordinary community of art fans and enthusiasts, and we rely on them so much, and they're a huge part of what makes my job really so rewarding and meaningful and fun. So I hope people get a chance to see it. And Kathy, I'm so grateful to you for taking the time as well.
Well, thank you again, and thank you for the tour and for the exhibit. It's fascinating. So, listeners, you got to get down there and see it. I've been talking it up to my friends and family. So,
great.
Well, on that note, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Listeners, if you enjoyed today's interview, please subscribe below so you're alerted of new interviews as they're posted. And if you've got any questions for me or for Jennifer, you can post them on my website, lifestorycurator.com. And I'll also list on my website just any other information about the exhibit. Jennifer, if you could send me that so I can post that on when I post the blog.
Sure.
So on that note, folks, stay well, stay healthy, and have a great day. Take care.